Hello guys, today we are with Nathan Terborg. 4 questions for him. He's the alchemist in the Galerie program, observing materials, giving it a new context in your soul. So Nathan, have you ever thought about switching to painting?
Would you like me to?
I don't think so. I respect your answer. Here we go again.
You know, it's interesting. So I started painting. That was the first thing that I did, and I enjoyed it. I found very quickly that what I wanted to do visually could not be accomplished in 2 dimensions. So I don't remember exactly when it was, but I was working on a piece and I started to sand a little bit, which you can do a little bit, you know, on canvas. But then I started to really work it, and it wasn't long, of course, before I punctured, you know, the canvas, and that was that. So from there, I moved on to wood panels, which just kind of give you more space, of course, to kind of sand and carve, you know, a little bit. And then I remembered, you know, back to childhood, my grandfather had a wood shop. And I remember some of my earliest memories are just walking into his wood shop and just the smell of fresh cut wood, seeing him, you know, all of his tools lined up just so. And it was just a magical place where he was retired and just making furniture, toys, you know, Christmas gifts, that kind of thing. And so I started very young. I got a carving knife and would do whittling, and I would carve, you know, little animals. And so when I started working with wood, I started thinking about, you know, what are some ways that I can carve and just manipulate and just get more dimension and more depth. And so then I started working with wood that got more and more thick, 2-3 centimeters, and that's kind of the first series of work that I did was almost exclusively wood that was carved and burned, and that then led me to everything that's here. You know, adding different materials, building up layers, which is, you know, what this show is about. So I don't have any plans on going back to painting anytime soon, but you never know.
I see. So how do you find your materials?
My antenna is always up. Always. Yeah.
Something.
I mean, even just walking around the city here, I've seen some things that look familiar.
Yeah.
There's some material that is everywhere in the world, right? Like plastic is everywhere, tarp is everywhere, you know, wood is, of course. But I've never met a material that I didn't at least want to try to experiment with, you know. So experimentation really is the core of my studio practice. It's the core of my work. It's a curiosity to really get my hands into things.
Yeah, it's about the process.
Yes, I think of it as dissection, you know, almost a scientific, like what is this, how can I get this down to its sort of essence and cut it down, burn it down, how can I get it down to its core? And then from there, developing a relationship with the material. That's kind of how I think about it, is like, how can I sort of tame this wild beast that I don't understand initially, and after enough repetition and time and sort of studying what can be done. I use a lot of heat, mostly melting, some burning, but just discovering, like some of these materials, for example, they're very delicate. There's a very, very fine line between a nice little melt where it can be manipulated and full flames, and then it's done, you know. But the beautiful thing about working with, you know, discarded material or trash is that for me it provides a tremendous amount of freedom. Possibilities. Yeah, because choice, options, because
freedom.
There's no limit to, I think, what can be done, and there's also, I think, no pressure for me, because the worst thing that can happen, the worst case is that it becomes trash. Again. Right. Which is what it was before, you know. So
but you give it a different meaning. The context is the transversion, and that's what makes it unique.
Yes.
A new soul.
I think, you know, I spoke with somebody about this at the opening last night. I have an appreciation for art that is clearly found objects, where you can identify this is what that used to be. I have a compulsion, a desire, an obsession with what else could it be? How can I make this, through process and experiment, how can I make it look different than what it was before? I like for people to be surprised when I tell them what it used to be. I don't want for it to be immediately obvious, oh, that used to be, you know, whatever it is. And so from a sourcing standpoint, one of the, not a rule, but something that I try to stick to is having sources for materials that are renewable, where I know I can get an almost endless supply.
Never run out.
Correct. Because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
I've worked with some materials where I only had a finite amount. Mostly things that I found in like construction dumpsters. They're some of my favorite places to go and discover things. When I drive past a construction site and I see the big bins, I'm always peeking in and seeing what I can find. And I found some really delicious, just amazing materials that by the time I figured out how to use them, I go back to my supply. My studio is full of very obsessive organization of different materials, and I go back to where it was and I realize I'm out. So that's kind of my worst, not my worst fear, but I try to work with material where I know I can always get more of it. So just using this as an example, the white layer on the very inside of this is made of feed bags. Some good friends of ours farm and raise chickens, and so I just hey, I need it, and they just dump full trash bags, full of them. The billboard tarps I get in huge sections. They're the big billboard advertisements, and so we're never going to run out of those unless we stop advertising for things. They're usually for attorneys, lawyers.
Don't see that.
It's always a surprise when I unfold a new one, what's going to be on the inside. With this one, there's a really interesting sort of blue that kind of peeks through, but some of the materials I'm sourcing myself, right? So like the coffee filters, I've got a pretty committed coffee habit. So these are all from my own pour overs. Yeah, my own personal reserve of materials. But I rarely meet a material that I didn't at least want to try. Most of it doesn't work. Most of it just isn't viable. 97% of my experiments, just fail and don't. But it leads me to the next thing, which is exciting for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any material that is most fascinating for you so far you ever worked with?
My latest obsession is metal. There's something about the process of melting a solid metal into a liquid form, pouring it into a mold, and then seeing it, of course, cool and become. It's so fun. And then what can be done afterwards, with metal to be able to then, for me, carve, add patinas, do different things with that. I think that I'd like to say that my favorite material I probably haven't found yet. I mean, I have a long list of things that are in the studio that I'm starting to play with and experiment with that I haven't.
What would be your first choice? Do you have any preferences?
There's a material called coroplast, and in the U.S. we call they're like yard signs. It's like just plastic core, like cardboard but made of plastic, right? And so there's a couple of pieces that we have hanging in front where the sculptural elements are made of that material. But that's a very fun material that will respond very differently to heat, but I can melt it and bend it, and then when it cools. It's rock solid, but it's a great material. But yeah, for me, it's just the fascination, the discovery, the dissection, to really pull things apart, see what's inside, and then see what can be done with them.
So Nathan, how do you feel about when people compare you to Bury or Amsel Kiefer? So you're in the country of Kiefer. So how do you feel about that?
I mean, those are some of my heroes, absolutely.
Officially.
And so I think there's actually something from the talk last night. I was thinking in bed I wanted to from Kiefer specifically that I really appreciate about his approach to work in interviews or the documentaries that I've seen. There's a story that I love thinking about and repeating to people. I can't recall which documentary it's from, but he tells a story of a show of his being installed. And as it's being taken from the truck and moved into the museum, it started raining while a lot of his work was outside. And these were some of the pieces that he was using straw, and mud and just different material that was starting to kind of fall off. And all of the installers and museum workers were frantically trying to pull things inside. Yeah. And meanwhile, he's just standing back saying, it's okay. Maybe it'll be better.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's one of those things where that is a complete embracing acceptance of it's going to be whatever it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
so I think of it in terms of like what I try to take from that and what I try to apply to that in terms of just my thought process around the work is that I can influence what happens, but I can't control it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, because control requires precision and perfectionism, which is something that I'm actively trying to avoid. It's part of my personality that I really am working against, with my work. So from Kiefer, it's that acceptance and that embracing of, it's going to be what it's supposed to be, and if it changes, that's okay.
So Nathan, what do you expect that people take from your work?
My hope is that my work invites exploration.
Yeah.
Everything that I make is really an invitation to explore.
Yeah, last night I experienced that myself. People are allowed to touch, so that's something unique. In a gallery, in a museum, it's not common and not accepted, but this time it's a thing.
I want for that to be something where, because it is very tactile, it's very sculptural, it's something, and it's very durable. It will hold up to being touched. So physically, exploring it, looking at it from different angles, especially pieces that have a lot of separation between the layers. This looks very different from here than it does from there. It looks very different in full daylight with the skylight versus artificial light, and so. On a maybe a broader level, I think I want for people to reconsider what something is and what something, and broadly speaking, what someone can become. Of course, the work means different things to me. We were Domenico and I were speaking yesterday about Louise Bourgeois, who's one of my absolute heroes as well, and she had a quote that's one of my favorites. It's something I think about a lot. I'm gonna paraphrase here, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but she said something like, if the work doesn't speak to you, then I have failed. The work doesn't need to be, in other words, it doesn't need to be explained. Burry said that many times as well. He resisted giving explanation, for what the work was about. And so I want for the work, if I'm successful, for the piece to speak directly to the person and to invite their own questions, for themselves. And my hope is that if it makes a connection, that people will want to just spend time with it. One of my favorite things from the opening last night was, I told you this before the show, I said, my night will be complete when I see people really getting
exploring.
in there. Because a successful piece to me is one that works from far away, in a little thumbnail from a distance, but it's also something that really pulls you in and says, come closer, take a closer look.
So guys, this was 4 questions on Nathan Terborg. Join us for the show.